I was 78 when it happened. Alone in the middle of goddamn nowhere, deep in the Alaskan wild snow up to my knees, and silence so heavy it rang in my ears. That's when they came. First just shadows slipping between trees, then the crunch of paws in the snow, and suddenly I was surrounded. A full pack, maybe 6, maybe more. Wolves, real ones, wild, hungry, eyes locked on me like they'd already decided I was dinner. My hands were frozen stiff, my breath barely misting out in the freezing air, and my heart beating like a war drum. Inside my ribs, I can't ever felt that kind of fear before, not in war, not in any fight I'd ever been in. This was primal, pure. I knew damn well I wouldn't outrun them. I couldn't climb, couldn't hide, couldn't play dead. So I stood there, hands slightly raised like some fool, thinking that'd help. But then, I did something real strange. I raised my hand and moved it just so. An old motion I hadn't used in decades, one that came to me out of nowhere, like muscle memory from a whole other life. And right then, they stopped. All of them just froze. One of them even sat back like he was waiting for a command. And then just like that, the whole pack backed off. It don't make sense, right? Hell, it didn't make sense to me either. Not at the time, but it wasn't magic, it wasn't luck. There's a reason why they listened, why they didn't tear me apart right there in the snow. There's a story behind that moment, a long one I'd buried for a lot of years far. From the cold, far from the blood and the howls of a different time. And believe me, it ain't easy to talk about, but I will. I owe it to them, and maybe I owe it to myself too. You gotta understand, this wasn't some random wilderness encounter. There was history in that stare down, a choice I made a long time ago, one I thought I'd never have to face again. Those wolves, they weren't just animals, not to me. That day, it wasn't just my life that was on the line. It was everything I'd tried to forget, everything I'd run from. So yeah, I raised my hand, and they listened. But here's the question that's probably burning in your mind right now. Why? What the hell did I do in my past that made a pack of wild wolves stop dead in their tracks? Stick around. You're gonna want to hear this. Hey, before we get into it, let me just say, thanks for being here. Really means a lot. If you like stories where nature ain't playing nice and things get real fast, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel Victims of Nature. We've got some wild stuff here, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, about that day in Alaska. Yeah, that day, the one where I found myself face to face with a pack of wild damn wolves. Most folks wouldn't believe what happened. Hell, sometimes I barely do myself, but I was there, I lived it, and now I'm gonna tell you exactly how it went down. Name's Thomas, but most folks just call me Tom. I was born in 1944, right at the tail end of the war, in a small town down in Montana. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest. My old man worked the railroads, and my mama, well, she did everything else. We didn't have much, but we had enough, you know? Grew up around dogs, horses, cold winters, and long-ass summers. That kind of upbringing sticks with you, teaches you how to keep your head low, work hard, and never make promises you can't keep. And above all, respect the land, 'cause out here, nature don't owe you a damn thing. I guess you could say I was always more at ease with animals than with people. I never much cared for big crowds, or the way folks sometimes smile with their mouths, but not their eyes. Animals, though, they're honest. A dog'll let you know if he don't like you. A horse'll buck you off if you're full of shit. You always know where you stand. Maybe that's why I left town young, barely 18, joined the army, tried to see the world with boots on. Ended up doing a few tours, nothing glorious. Saw things I'd rather not remember. Did things I sure as hell can't forget, but that's another story. By the time I hit my 30s, I was back stateside, drifting a bit. Odd jobs, construction, drove trucks, worked on a few ranches. I didn't have much family left, and I didn't exactly go out of my way to make new connections. I guess I figured life was simpler that way. Eventually settled in Anchorage, Alaska. Something about the cold, the quiet, the distance from, well, everything. It just felt right, like a place where a man could disappear without having to explain himself. Bought. A small cabin about an hour out from town. No neighbors in sight, just trees, snow, and the occasional moose wandering too close to the porch. Peaceful in that rough kind of way. Now I ain't no hermit. I went into town now and then, picked up supplies, traded stories at the diner. Folks knew me as the old guy in the woods, and that suited me just fine. Didn't need much. A wood stove. A few rifles, a good pair of boots. That's the thing about living out there. You learn real quick what matters and what don't. No one gives a damn about your past if you can fix a busted generator or know how to handle a bear sniffing around your shed. I'd always liked walking, even in the deep cold. Especially in the deep cold, actually. There's something about the silence of winter in Alaska that feels sacred, like the land's holding its breath. Sometimes I'd take the same old trail that looped around the back end of the ridge where the trees thinned out and you could see clear across the valley if the sky was right. That trail had been there long before I showed up, probably used by trappers hunters, maybe even the old native tribes long before that. I walked it so many times I could do it half asleep, even with the snow waist-high. That day, the one I'm talking about, it started like any other. Late December, cold as hell, sun barely climbing over the horizon even though it was mid-morning. I'd packed light, a thermos of black coffee, some jerky in my coat pocket, and my usual 3006 slung over my shoulder. Not because I was looking to shoot anything, more like just in case. Out here, just in case is part of the routine. You forget that once, and the land will remind you real quick why it ain't to be taken lightly. There'd been rumors in town, a couple of sled dogs gone missing from the edge of a trapper's camp about a week earlier. Some folks said wolves. Others figured maybe it was just a couple hungry lynx, or maybe even a damn bear that hadn't fully hibernated yet. I didn't think much of it. Animals get desperate in the winter, same as people. If they're hungry enough, they'll do things you wouldn't expect. But even so, something about those stories had me a little on edge. I told myself I was just being cautious, but deep down, I think my gut was already telling me something wasn't right. The trail was quiet that morning, quieter than usual. No birds, no squirrel chatter, not even the crunch of snow under little paws. Just my boots pressing down, slow and steady breath, huffing out like smoke signals in the cold. I remember stopping once, just stopping, no real reason, and realizing how alone I was. Not the kind of alone where you feel peaceful, but the kind where it starts to settle on your skin like frost, like the land's watching you, weighing you, figuring out if you belong or not. There's a place about 4 miles in where the trail opens up into this wide, frozen clearing, rimmed with black pines and backed by a small ridge. I'd always liked that spot. Quiet, still. I was standing right in the middle of it when I first noticed the sound, real soft like snow, shifting but heavier, like something big was moving just beyond the tree line. I turned my head slow, didn't want to spook whatever it was. Could have been a deer, could have been a moose, but then I saw. And first just one, then 2 more. Then the whole damn line of them slipping out of the trees like smoke. Wolves, big ones, real big. Black-gray and one almost white as the snow itself. They didn't rush me, didn't growl, just fanned out in a half-circle, eyes locked on me like they were taking their time sizing me up. I should have run, or screamed, or fired a warning shot, but I didn't do any of that. I just stood there, frozen, my hands clenched around the strap of my rifle heart, hammering so loud I could barely hear the wind. I'd seen wolves before, from a distance. But this was different. They weren't afraid. Hell, they looked calm, curious even, but I wasn't stupid. I knew damn well how fast calm could turn to chaos when you're dealing with wild animals, especially in the dead of winter. They didn't blink, didn't move, just watched me, waiting, and that's where everything started to shift. But I'll get to that. For now, just know this, there's more to that moment than just fear, more than instinct or survival. That day wasn't just about wolves or snow or some old man caught off guard. It was about memory, about choices, about something I thought I'd buried so deep it had never crawled back to the surface. Turns out I was wrong. I don't know how long I stood there in that clearing. Time does this weird thing when fear sets. It stretches bends, makes seconds feel like hours. The cold had stopped bothering me by then. My body wasn't even shaking anymore. I was locked in, stuck between 1,000 instincts, screaming at me to run, to raise the rifle, to do something. But every part of me knew if I moved wrong, it was game over. Wolves don't waste energy. If they were there staring me down like that, they had a reason, and I had no clue what that reason was. Then one of them stepped forward. Not a rush, not a charge, just one slow, steady step into the open. This one was different, bigger, not just in size, but in presence. His fur was a dark grey with streaks of silver down his back ears, high chest broad, and his eyes, God, his eyes. They locked on mine like they'd seen through time itself. And I ain't trying to sound poetic here. I mean it. That stare was heavy, like he wasn't just looking at me, but looking into me. He didn't bare his teeth, didn't growl. He just stood there, head slightly lowered, like he was waiting. I felt my right hand twitch, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, something automatic, and without even thinking, I lifted it, my right hand, slow and steady, palm out, fingers spread in a kind of loose triangle, a shape I hadn't made in years. Not since, damn. That's when it hit me. It was a signal, one I'd learned decades ago, back when I worked at a wildlife rehabilitation center outside Fairbanks, a lifetime ago. I was in my late 30s, just after the army, looking for something that made sense in a world that hadn't made sense for years. They took in injured predators, bears, cougars, wolves. We didn't just feed them and toss them back out. We studied them, trained them for re-release, taught them to fear humans again, so they'd survive out there. I spent months working with one particular litter. A female grey wolf had been hit by a snowmobile. She didn't make it, but 3 pups survived. I helped raise them, fed them from bottles, sat outside their enclosure day after day until they stopped trembling every time they heard a boot step. And one of them, the biggest of the bunch, the alpha from day one, he was mine. We called him Ghost, not because of his color, he was grey as dusk, but because he moved like one. Quiet, precise, smart, scary smart. That hand signal. It was a control gesture we'd used, adapted from military K9 units. We didn't train wolves the way folks train dogs, but we used the signals to test responsiveness, observe behaviors. Ghost had picked it up early, way too early, and when it came time to release them, I was the one who let him go. I watched him disappear into the brush and figured I'd never see him again. But there he was, that same stance, that same damn stare. I knew it. Deep down in my bones, I knew it was him. He didn't lunge, didn't blink. He just gave this slow, almost imperceptible nod, like an acknowledgement, and then stepped back. And just like that, the others followed. One by one, silent, as shadows they turned and slipped back into the tree line until the clearing was empty. Again. I stood there for I don't know how long, breathing hard, not from exhaustion but from disbelief. I lowered my hand, slow fingers shaking now, and I just stood there staring at the spot where he'd been. My heart was pounding, but not from fear anymore. It was something else. Grief maybe, or something like it. 'Cause in that moment, I wasn't just thinking about survival. I was thinking about a younger version of myself, standing behind a chain-link fence with a clipboard in hand, telling Ghost that he was ready, that he'd be fine out there. Turns. Out he was, but that wasn't the end of it. On the walk back, every step felt heavier. I kept looking over my shoulder, not because I thought they'd changed their minds, but because a part of me couldn't believe what just happened. I wasn't just a man lost in the woods anymore. I was someone remembered, and not by a friend, not by some long-lost family member, but by a creature most folks don't even believe can feel anything close to loyalty. My boots dragged through. The snow, half of me wanting to run, the other half wishing I'd stayed longer. Not out of curiosity, but out of something deeper. Like I owed him something. Like maybe he'd waited all this time for a moment like that. I made it back to the cabin just before nightfall breath, fogging up the glass as I looked out the window, wondering if he was still out there. If maybe he was watching, not as a threat, not even as a protector, but as something else, as a reminder. See the wild, don't forget, and sometimes the past don't either. You think you've moved on. You think the things you've done, good or bad, are buried. But nature's got a funny way of remembering. It doesn't hold grudges, doesn't forgive, but it remembers, it recognizes. And every now and then it shows you just how much. And that moment in the snow, that was just the beginning. Want to hear how it all wraps up? What I did after that? Well, that's a whole nother story. I didn't sleep that night. I mean, how could I? I kept replaying every second in my head like a busted movie reel stuck on loop. The stare, the silence, the signal, the way they just backed off without a single sound. I sat by the window, lights off, wrapped in my old army blanket, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee that tasted more like snowmelt and ash than anything else. Outside, the world was pitch black sky, heavy with stars, wind whistling through the pine like it was trying to whisper secrets, but I wasn't scared anymore. That feeling had passed. What came after was something softer, something deeper, kinda like awe mixed with a strange sort of peace. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't just go on like nothing happened. That moment out there with him, with the others, it meant something. Maybe not to anyone else, but to me. It was like the earth itself had tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you still got unfinished business." So I packed up my old backpack, filled it with the essentials, water, food, fire starter, flare gun, you know the drill, and headed back out to the ridge. The trail was quieter than ever, not silent like before, but calm, like the forest had exhaled. I didn't feel that same pressure in my chest. If anything, it felt like the land was watching me again. Yeah, but this time without judgment, just observing. Curious, maybe even waiting. I didn't go all the way back to the clearing. I stopped halfway up by this fallen tree I used to sit on years ago, took off my gloves, laid my hand flat against the bark. That's when I heard it. A rustle, soft but deliberate. I turned slow, and there he was again. Ghost. Just him this time. No pack, no movement. Just him standing between two pines, calm, still watching. I didn't raise my hand. Didn't move. I just looked at him and nodded, like I understood something now that I hadn't before. Like whatever thread connected us, man to beast, past to present, had finally come full circle. And in that moment, I swear to God, he nodded back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some fairy tale ending, but it was enough. A gesture, a moment of mutual understanding. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods, the same way he'd come, and I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I made my way back home. Slow, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to rush the quiet. That kind of silence, it's rare. The kind that doesn't press down on you, but holds you gently. I opened the door to my cabin, dropped my gear by the wall, and stood in the middle of the room, feeling the heat from the stove warm my face. And that's when I realized I felt lighter, like I'd let go of something I'd been carrying so long I didn't even know it had weight. The days after that were different. Subtle stuff, really. I'd go for walks and feel less alone, even when I didn't see a single soul. Started keeping a journal again. I hadn't done that since the 80s. I wrote about Ghost, about the rehab center, about all the stuff I'd buried in the back of my mind, like clutter in an attic. Didn't write it for anyone but me. Hell, maybe I was finally old enough to admit that some memories ain't meant to be forgotten, just understood. Couple weeks later, I drove into town, stopped by the local store, grabbed some coffee, sat on the same bench I always did. Old Bill, the store owner, asked me if I'd heard about that Wolfpack folks kept whispering about. Said someone spotted 'em real close to the highway. I just smiled, told him he ought to keep his dogs inside for a while. He laughed. We didn't say much else. Sometimes you don't need to. And now, sitting here telling this story, I realize that what happened out there wasn't about survival. Not really. It was about connection. about the pieces of your past that find a way back no matter how far you run. You think you've put it all behind you, think you're done with the world, but maybe the world ain't done with you. What Ghost did out there, it wasn't just recognition, it was forgiveness, a quiet way of saying you mattered, you still do. And in return I gave him space, let him be what he was always meant, to be free, and somehow that gave me my own kind of freedom too. So yeah, I still live in that same cabin, still make my coffee too strong, still curse the cold when the heater acts up. But now when I step out onto my porch and hear the wind move through the trees, I don't wonder if something's watching. Me, I know it is. And for the first time in a long time, that doesn't scare me. It comforts me. 'Cause I know what's out there ain't just wild. It remembers. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it forgives. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever run from your past, thinking it'd never catch up? What would you do if the one thing you tried hardest to forget was the very thing that saved your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your side. And if this story made you feel something, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to Victims of Nature. We got more stories coming that'll make your heart race and maybe make you see the world a little different. And hey, just so we're clear, this story you just heard, it's a work of fiction. A tale spun to keep your mind wandering and your imagination alive. Don't go out there thinking you can raise your hand to a wild wolf and expect the same result. Real life don't work like that. But stories show us what could be, and sometimes that's exactly what we need.